Hey, welcome to CSIS. My name is Joseph Majkut. I'm the Director of our Energy Security and Climate Change Program. My guest today requires almost no introduction. Jigar Shah is the Director of the DOE's Loan Program Office. Before he was in public service, he was a successful entrepreneur in the clean energy space, an investor. And he's taken those skills to bring the DOE's LPO office to full articulation, and now with new authorities under the IRA, he's trying to turbocharge the office. We're going to have an interesting conversation today because he's always a lively and informative person. He and I have been looking forward to this conversation for some time. There's a couple things I want to really make sure that we touch on today. It's easy to view the LPO as a technology policy or a technology instrument for low carbon innovation. But I think we're underrating its role in securing supply chains, in providing a secure energy system for the future. And I really want to talk about that. I want to talk about the tension between how we deploy and to meet our climate goals, and doing so in a way that reduces risks, particularly on the energy security side. And we can't talk about that stuff without thinking a little bit about China and how we're going to integrate Chinese technologies versus compete with Chinese companies in the future. And the last thing I want to talk about is and hear your thoughts on is the LPO's role at the sort of the vanguard. Right? As a bunch of other things have happened. We passed the IRA. So maybe I can start here. The DOE LPO started as part of ARA, right? 2008, 2009, issued a bunch of loans and has some real success stories to claim. First, commercial investments in solar and wind in the United States, at least in the modern era. Supporting Tesla, Ford, and others as they were doing the first investments in EV battery technology and manufacturing. Now, in 2023, we've got the Paris Agreement, we've got net zero targets all throughout the economy and our country, we've got the IRA, we've got the IIJA. There's a lot of activity driving an investment into the same things that LPO is supposed to pursue. So maybe a great place to start, Jigar, is like, what problem is LPO solving in 2023?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think one that I think has the same answer as one would give in 2010, right? Which is that America has this extraordinary ability to fund, entrepreneurs A rounds and B rounds and C rounds and all that stuff, right? And we cover it like, it's like a horse race, right, with the Triple Crown and whatever else. But this whole first of a kind deployment stuff is really hard, right? The vast majority of commercial banks just go, God, that's a lot of extra work that I have to do to be able to get that through my investment committee. I don't want to bother. And so, the fact that the LPO was essential to the first 500 megawatt solar projects, right, Tesla, et cetera, is, I think, something that you just stated. But the part that you may not have paid attention to is that after we provided that money for the first 5 projects, the projects were largely built by 2013. There was nobody to buy them, right? In fact, I think Warren Buffett bought all of them pretty much. I think Mid-American bought almost all of them. We all know that Warren Buffett gets a good deal, so he got a good deal on those. It wasn't until probably 2015, remember, we did all the yieldcos on Wall Street, right? NRG, SunEdison, others did yieldcos. Then 2016, 2017, a bunch of insurance companies and pension funds were like, oh, we were missing. These are actually good assets to own. And then around 2019 is when the market started functioning, right? So we entered the market in 2010, 2011, and it took all the way into 2019 until the markets were actually fully functioning in a way that was at this $1 trillion scale that we're talking about now, right? So now people are super frustrated. They're like, well, why can't the markets put more money into hydrogen or carbon sequestration and storage or next generation geothermal, whatever it is, right? And the answer is they don't want to, and it takes them 7 to 8 years to get comfortable. So LPO plays the exact same role now, right? We need to help all these people that have great ideas. I do it without judgment, right? Whether it's nuclear or transmission or CCS or hydrogen or whatever it is, and you give them the debt that they need through the reasonable prospect of repayment to do their first project, second project, through 6 projects, right, according to our statute. And then you hope to hopefully bring them across the bridge to bankability to full market acceptance, right? But I think the other piece of this is that we were missing in action for 10 years, right? The Loan Programs Office was largely shut down, right? And was dormant, according to the secretary, and really was brought back. So there were all these people in the 2015, 2017, 2019 timeframe who were ready for us to exist and to provide them with debt. And we weren't really functioning in that capacity, right? And so we lost, pick a number, 5, 8, 9 years of getting these technologies across the bridge to bankability. And you see that in the data today, right? The vast majority of climate-related investments are solar, wind, electric vehicles, lithium-ion batteries that we funded in our first version, and all the rest of those things that you would want to be on that list are in the 20 billion, 10 billion, 5 billion range, and not in the 100 billion, 200 billion, 300 billion range.
What explains the ebb? So you had the flood, and then you have the ebb, and what do you think really explains that?
Well, I mean, we sort of lost our license to operate right after Solyndra, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I think but for the full backing of the president and the Secretary of Energy, I don't think we would be, in business today, right? And it's a great thing to see because we were clearly missing in the ecosystem, right? You have the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations now. Right. You always had this function where DOE would provide large grants for demonstration, but this whole commercialization effort was clearly missing.
Right. And as you think about, IRA has given you a bunch of new money, or at least a bunch of new authority, mm-hmm. and we can talk about what that means, and there's lots of interesting new programs to articulate. But when you think about this sort of new and revised role, how is LPO, and how are you pushing LPO to change its practices to avoid this happening again, right? How do you keep the social license to operate, and how do you balance that with being able to take enough risk that you are really meeting the mission of LPO?
Yeah, so that actually has been super easy. No, I mean, to be honest, on the staff side of things, right, we got a lot of unsolicited advice, let's call it, in 2012 to 2014. The vast majority of that has been implemented, right? So we have a risk management group, a portfolio management group. We have, several hundred people that work at LPO. We have an extraordinary team, and I think people recognize that. So we've done lots of briefings on the Hill, lots of briefings within the administration, and people are like, wow, you guys are actually best in class, to the point where we are now being asked to teach some of the other lending institutions across government what best-in-class risk practices look like, right? So that part I inherited. I mean, mm-hmm. I've certainly featured it and bragged about it, but I didn't have to fix it. It was already there, and we hired more people into it. And then I think that the other piece of it was to get, the potential borrowers to believe that we were open for business. And so we spent a lot of time in 2021 and 2022 to say, hey, we're open for business. We got our first loans out the door, mm-hmm. Slowly but surely. And now I think we've got, 141 active applications seeking $120 billion worth of loan proceeds. What we don't have is an ecosystem that works. So, we've got a couple of law firms and others who are great and who help some of our applicants make it through our process. Mm-hmm. But, Deloitte, KPMG, PwC, those guys are nowhere to be found. When you look at some of the other, players that you would normally see that would help some of these entrepreneurs who are really, raising debt for the first time, right? They're experts at raising equity. They have no idea how to raise debt. They should be able to ask a friend to help them through our process, and those friends haven't stood up their teams yet. So there's no one to hire really to get through our office. So that's the next piece we have to do.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was perusing the website in preparation for today, and you've got, compared to 141 active applications, relatively few closings over the last fiscal year.
Sure.
4 closings, more conditional commitments, right? Which is kind of a first benchmark or second benchmark. Is that if you want to solve that problem, if you want to increase flow rate, if you want to lend out all the money you can, is it you need more time, more staff? They need more support outside of LPO to put together great applications? What are the limiting factors?
Yeah, so I mean, I've benchmarked LPO regularly with the commercial debt markets. I certainly have done lots of deals in the commercial debt markets, mm-hmm. so some of that's fairly easy for me to do. We're no different than the commercial debt markets, not at all. Like there's some statutory issues that we have, like we can't refinance out existing debt and some of that stuff that we have. But otherwise, we're really no different. And so the reason people aren't flying through our office is because they actually don't know how to raise commercial debt, right? And they would be rejected on the spot at Citibank or JP Morgan or other places because they'd say, this is weird. We don't want to even do this, right? But in general, we have a public policy, mission, so we can't reject people for not being able to fly through our office. So we're doing intensive mentorship and saying, hey, here's how you do this properly. Here's the kind of data that you need to do. Because like you're a technologist, I get it, right? And you've spent 10 years getting your technology ready for prime time. But like, you actually need to also meet the reasonable prospect of repayment out of our office. And so, just to give you maybe some color on the numbers, of the 141 active applications, I'd say like maybe 40 of them are fully prepared to get through our office, right? So, have enough detailed data, permits, NEPA, all the other things in place where they can actually get through the office, right? Of those 40, you put them on a 2x2 matrix where some of them have closed debt before, so call them fast flyers, and then some of them have all of the things that they need done completed, right? Like they've completed a feed study, they've gotten an independent engineer report, all that stuff. So call those high, they've completed their checklist, right? They've completed their checklist, right? So once you do that analysis, right? High readiness, let's put it that way, right? Then, we need to help all 4 of those quadrants, right? Like we have a public policy mandate. So if you're not a fast flyer and have low readiness, but have a great project, we still need to be able to help you, right? But of those 40 people, only like 12 are in the upper right-hand corner, right? Where they're high flyers and high readiness, right? So the whole ecosystem is sort of they're not really ready for all of our money to go out the door. Right. And so it's one of those things where we have to bring everybody along, right? We have to fix whatever's, got cobwebs in our, system. But we also have to, meet the requirements of Congress. Like we can't lower our standards to help people get through faster. We have to get everyone up to our standards. And so that takes time. And I think that, we shouldn't rush that as much as we should, meet people where they are and help them.
But it also, I'm hearing that there's an instructional role here, right? So somebody goes through the LPO process, they learn how to take commercial debt for this kind of technology, maybe through the first or the second, third, the fourth, the fifth installation. But for the next 10, they can go to a commercial bank and they're more familiar with the process. Is that part of the function that maybe we hear less about?
Well, we certainly want people to do that, right?
Yeah.
We certainly don't want people to use our resources if they can go to a commercial bank, right? That's not additional.
Right.
We're not here to compete with commercial banks. I'd say that commercial banks are a lot less interested in serving our applicants than you would think. Like they really want to wait until the very last possible sort of moment to help these folks. And in general, their whole thing is just, we would there's a concept that they use called fee basket, right? So they're like, what's the fee basket for this sector, right? How much of a bonus can I make by serving the sector, basically, right? And so some of it's like, we could do this first deal. We might be forced to do it because it's a longtime client of the bank, and so we're kind of forced to do it. But, are we really going to do 12 deals exactly like this, right?
Right.
And so they're waiting for that sort of dynamic to present itself before they want to jump in with both feet.
So when you think about the kind of projects that the LPO is supporting, right? First of a kind, early commercialization, how much does technology risk versus just broader uncertainty about how to do this and whether you can get it done on time and on budget and all those things, which of those risks are LPO trying to help manage?
Yeah, it's more the latter than the former. So we never take real technology risk. So we have 10,000 engineers, scientists, and experts on the DOE platform at the labs, et cetera. So we we can tell whether we're taking real technology risk, right? Someone will tell us, oh yeah, we've demonstrated that like 17 times before, like that will work, right? We definitely take execution risk all day. So someone might say that technology, like the monolith materials, methane pyrolysis, right?
Yeah.
Invented probably 50 years ago. Someone took a run at it in the 1990s, failed, right? They never got the system to work above a 30% uptime, right? So 70% of the time it was in maintenance, and 30% of the time it was working. Monolith is like, obviously going to get that higher, right? Because that's how the numbers work, et cetera, right? And so we take that risk, but we don't take the risk that methane pyrolysis itself actually works, right? So that we don't take. The other part of your question was like, so how do you evaluate this technology? We do that all day. And in fact, commercial banks come to us all the time and say to us, like, we really thought the way that you handled the risk profile of that project was super smart, and we'd like to copy that risk framework that you put together for that new asset class, right? And so we do that a lot, right? Really thoughtful, like, how do you protect yourself from this risk and this risk and this risk, right? Because we're thinking about it for the first time for that asset class.
I don't know if it's appropriate, maybe we could dive into an example, right? So you've made a big push on critical minerals. You've got a nice blog post on LPO activities on critical minerals.
Sure.
There's some conditional commitments. One of them is the Rhyolite Ridge processing facility. The problem we're trying to solve is for battery materials, so much processing goes on in China. We've lost a lot of that capacity here in the United States. If we want to grow these supply chains to meet decarbonization goals or just guarantee energy security, we have to have a way to do this processing, friendshoring, onshoring, et cetera.
Yeah.
And this is a pretty large investment, right? So it's a lithium processing facility nearby a resource that the company's going to develop. But there's like a bunch of challenges to developing projects like this, right?
Yeah.
And integrating it with the mine that's nearby, right? You've got Deems buckwheat, which is a desert wildflower many people are familiar with. You've got efforts to push mining standards, tribal consultations. All those kind of present some factor of risk, right? And something that the company needs to work through. And how does the LPO help evaluate those things?
Yeah. So let's take there's two projects. Right? So one's probably like Ioneer, Rhyolite Ridge, and then the other one's like Sierra Resources, Vidalia in Louisiana. So the list of things that you just suggested were actually not that hard. So on Ioneer, you've got a technology called DLE, which is basically removing lithium from clays and that kind of stuff, right? It's been operating in Argentina for some time. We've certainly got a lot of technology at the DOE that we've done here. So whether it works or not is something that we know, so we're not taking technology risk. Now, whether it can be done at this price point or that price point is something we are taking a risk on, right? Like that's basically the effectiveness of the process, right, and how they execute on that. So that we're taking a risk on. Then when you go to the buckwheat issue or the tribal consultation or the things, that is part of our standard NEPA evaluation, right? And so we worked closely with the Department of Interior and said, hey, what do you think about the buckwheat issue? Is this a showstopper? The company had worked 2 years previous to us to figure out what they could do, whether they could do the mining without and processing without affecting the buckwheat. It was determined that they could. They worked with all the tribes in the area. The tribes were fully supportive of the project.
Right.
So that part was great. So in general, my sense is that this process is not as hard as one makes it out to be. I feel like in general, the problem with the process is that it gets political sometimes, right? And so sometimes instead of actually it being a checklist, it's like, did you get the right sort of hat tip or, nod from somebody in the audience, right? And I can't control that, right? So from my perspective, I gave them a conditional commitment. The conditional commitment was, factually correct. It met all the requirements, and it's subject to NEPA being officially approved. We checked with Interior to see whether there was any red flags. They said we don't see any right now. So, and if you notice, they put them into full NEPA, like
Right.
concurrently with our conditional commitment, right? So I think we had some role in accelerating that process, which was good. On cyber resources, right? I mean, they are getting ore from one of the most productive graphite resources in the world in Mozambique. That resource currently goes to China. They are diverting it now to Vidalia, Louisiana. There's real issues, right? Mozambique is not the most peaceful, sort of country in the world, and so there's potential conflict that might, affect the operations of the mine. So we required them to have, like 6 months of storage of ore at the facility in Louisiana, so that like they could work through any of those conflicts. So we worked through this issue. Now we also rated the project as likely to lose money, right, for us. Right? Because it's super risky. You've got like supply chain from Mozambique. You've got processing facility here, right? So in general, like I don't think we have been asked, maybe to a previous question you asked, we haven't been asked to take no risk.
Right.
We've been asked to be very honest about the risks that we're taking. And so we've been very honest about the risks that we're taking. We've had to set aside money for potential losses, right, out of the credit subsidy that we've allocated. And so I think the goal here is to provide full transparency to all involved and say, here's the risk we're taking, here's how we're mitigating that risk, et cetera. And I think we've done a really good job in both the case of Ioneer and the case of Cyber Resources to make sure that we're not the long pole in the tent, right? We've said, here are the things you have to do, here are the conditions precedent you have to meet. In Ioneer's case, they're at the front end of finishing that list.
Yep.
In the Cyber Resources case, they're at the back end. They've already completed it. They've now drawn capital right, for that project, which I think is great. And then it's an entirely different set of characteristics for Life Cycle and Redwood, which are more recycling facilities than like processing facilities.
So under IRA, LPO was given some expanded authority and maybe some new tasks. One of those new authorities is the Energy Infrastructure Reinvestment Fund or program. And this makes available money so that DOE or LPO, can invest in projects that are not necessarily first of a kind innovative, but are being applied in existing infrastructure areas or repurposing things. What's your sense of how that project is, or how that program is going to work, and how that is shifting the role that LPO is going to play in the broader energy transition? Yeah,
I mean, in general, I'm very outcomes based, and so when someone tells me, "Hey, we have this new authority, we'd like for you to implement it," I'm like, "How do we succeed at it?" As opposed to, "Here's all my challenges."
Right.
So I think when I first went out to the folks who, were supporting the 1706 program, we talked to a bunch of people. They said, "We don't really need your money." I was like, "Well, that isn't going to work." And so, we went out and recruited some really great people, Drain Cost Call and like Leslie Rich, who, was the top stock analyst on Wall Street for decades on, utility space. So she's come in. We've talked to a bunch of utility CEOs and CFOs. With her trust relationships, we were able to talk to them, and they were like, "Actually, you're right. We're not going to be able to make any of the promises that we've made to the public service commissions that we've, made promises to, or the governors, without these resources." So, and so we've had, multiple consultations with a lot of those utilities, and now they're saying, "Okay, yeah, you're right. We should do that." So we've got about $30 billion worth of early applications coming in, and then the way utilities work is, they move at the speed of, utility jealousy. So, the first set of 5 go in, and then the next 10 sort of like follow their lead, and the next 20 can follow their lead. So we're working hard to make that happen. Some of it's on this coal to nuclear piece, right? Converting coal to nuclear plants. Others are on reconductoring, right? So figuring out how to take existing transmission lines and putting in better wire, more advanced wire to carry, 2x the capacity. We've got one utility that wants to do a virtual power plant, right, to replace some of their natural gas peaker plants that are in inner city neighborhoods that they need to shut down. So I mean, we're meeting the utilities where they are. So they file an integrated resource plan, and then, we say, great, which parts of this could we reduce ratepayer impacts by, using this money, right? And we are reducing ratepayer impacts. I mean, the average project reduces ratepayer impacts by half, which is a big deal. So I think from that perspective, I think that things are going okay, like it's a new program, so I'm sure we'll have lots of issues along the way.
Let me ask you like a little bit about your experience at LPO and in public service, right? So it gives you, I think, a really interesting picture on the energy economy, right? Who's got cool tech, who wants to build, where their cost curves really are, what the challenges are. And you can integrate that with your personal experience in a way I think a lot of people in our country would struggle to do. And I'm interested now that you're a couple years in on how your service here has changed your outlook on energy transition, be that particular technologies, level of optimism, and the role of these public-private partnerships in helping everything along.
Yeah. I don't know that I've changed my outlook. I think I was always a very optimistic person. And so I'm more optimistic today.
We share that. That's why I like you so much.
I do have more data than I've ever had. So, we've done pre-consultations on $500 billion worth of projects.
Right.
So we clearly have a better data set of what's happening in the United States than Bloomberg or any of the investment banks do, which is interesting. And it actually feeds into policy. Like one of the things that I find interesting about DC is that they don't get good feedback from the private sector in general. The feedback they get is very sort of sanitized through government relations people or other folks. Like the CEOs and CFOs who actually allocate capital rarely tell people what the quid pro quo is. Like,
right.
You want us to do this thing, here's what we need to do this thing. Like that conversation never seems to happen. So we were able to launch this liftoff report effort, right? So we did nuclear, long duration energy storage, hydrogen, and carbon management. And in those reports, we attempted not to make DOE strategy or policy, but to actually accurately reflect all the stuff that's in our pipeline, but also all the conversations that we've had at the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations and OTT and other places to say, here's what the private sector is telling us, right? That these measures that you passed are enough, or they're not enough. Here's where they're being implemented in ways that will be unlikely to be positive to us allocating capital. One of the things that I've noticed is that I don't think anyone has ever gotten that level of granularity of feedback in the policymaking circles in DC. So that I think has been useful. I think the other piece is that what we're attempting to do is extraordinarily hard, and I find people tend to go to positions of that person's trying to screw me over too quickly. So when you think about building things for a first of a kind, obviously, that's difficult. But then also working with unions or working with community benefits plans or justice groups or whatever, I find that the level of distrust probably comes from 40 years of us not really doing a lot of this stuff in this country, and so there's not a lot of muscle memory there. And so a lot of what I'm doing is saying to people, I don't know why you're just assuming that these people are bad or anti-union or anti-justice or whatever else. Why don't you talk to them?
Anti-buckwheat.
Anti-buckwheat, whatever it is. And oftentimes you find that no one's ever talked to each other. And you find that very quickly they can find areas of the Venn diagram overlapping where they can actually de-risk their project by using union labor or de-risk their project by having better community benefits plans or whatever it is. And so I find that people just there's these theoretical concepts that are not operationalized. And so, a lot of that stuff were instincts that I probably had before I came here, but have been reinforced since I was here, is that most people actually are looking to do the right thing. Most of the entrepreneurs, most of the innovators, et cetera. They just don't know how to. They've been spending 10 years on their technology. They've never thought about labor or, community benefits plans or any of those things. Yeah. They're just trying not to go out of business. So I think that part has been interesting and refreshing to see how open-minded everyone's been.
And can you take lessons from your experience at LPO as an institution that is supposed to be comfortable with risk, but wants to diversify it, so not all this public money gets lost, it goes to the purposes it was authorized for.
Yeah.
And think about how does the private capital environment need to change to maybe be a little bit more like LPO, maybe a little bit more like itself, but to advance our progress through energy
Yeah.
transition?
Yeah, I'm not there yet. I mean, I think all of what you say is true and is something we might be able to have an influence on. We're a little early days in our work. I mean, things like just basic things like the U.S. benefits from foreign direct investment, right? Having the best and brightest in the world decide to manufacture things here is a good thing for us, right? And so us sending signals that are mixed to people saying, we might want your technology, we might not want your technology, is not a great thing. Like, so for me, like, what I'm trying to do is to get the U.S. to believe that we can commercialize technology here. We sort of lost our way for a long time. We have invented almost everything that is worth inventing here, and then we sort of sent it to other continents to get commercialized. I think we should like not do that, and we should try to commercialize it here. But also, to the extent that we sent technologies to other continents in the past, we should encourage them to bring that technology in whatever form it's at now back and then build off of that, right? As opposed to starting from square one. And so, like, I think that that is a lot of what I'm focused on, is making sure the top of the funnel is full and we're bringing the best and brightest to our country so that we have choices, right? I do think that that is having a positive impact with the commercial banking sector. They're starting to say, oh, like the data coming out of LPO is really good. Their loss rates are very low. In fact, our loss rates are roughly the same as commercial banks, which
Triple B minus is...
Yeah, which probably means that people are thinking that we're not taking enough risk. But, I'm pretty comfortable where we are right now. And so I think we're having an influence on that. And I think we're also having an influence on policymakers, where a lot of policymakers are like, why is this thing that I care deeply about not happening? And so we have the ability now to say, well, I can't speak for the totality of that question, but I can say, here's what the entrepreneurs and innovators and capital allocators who are using LPO are saying to me as to why they're not moving more confidently on nuclear or hydrogen or carbon management or whatever it is the issue that people care about.
So I've heard a couple things that I'm going to take home from today that I think I'd like to recapitulate. The first is that LPO serves like a relatively unique function and is back, right? With like maybe a little bit badder, maybe a little bit fired up, but that it also plays an important role in helping companies that aren't quite ready for its services, that maybe I didn't understand before. I'm impressed by the breadth and of the kind of investments that LPO is making, right? It's not 2 buckets, it's like a dozen. And that, when you think about the path to net zero, that is definitely where we need to be working. And that the future is relatively bright.
Oh yeah, and the future is very, it's, what's that phrase? Like, I need shades. But, I think one other thing I would say is that there's a bit of confusion around the pathway to commercialization, right? Because when you think about climate change, you're talking about gigaton scale, right? And when you think about like the Forbes, whatever, like richest people or whatever it is that, I think is happening with all this venture capital sort of coverage, they're not actually saving any gigatons, right? Like when you think about all of the electric vehicles that we've ever shipped, it's not saving a gigaton yet. So somebody has become the wealthiest person in the world, but not saved a gigaton yet, right? And so I feel like part of our challenge in having these conversations is I'm happy to celebrate entrepreneurs. I certainly loved being an entrepreneur in the past and love the entrepreneurial effort that's happening at LPO today. But like I just think infrastructure and like innovation are like mixed into one conversation. And they're 2 completely separate conversations. On this side, they're like crafting arrows that go into a quiver and provide like, choices for us to then be able to implement things, right? And on this side, we're talking about not how to build our first advanced reactor deployment program, like reactor that number 1, right, in Wyoming or Washington State or whatever, but actually how do we build 100? Right? And like, I think that LPO is actually doing the other thing, right? And I feel like we are like often bucketed with like ARPA-E or offset clean energy demonstrations or other people who are doing this other thing. And like, we're not doing that thing, right? Like what we're doing is figuring out how we build the first 6 of 100.
Right.
Right? Because frankly, that's how we reduce our risk.
Yeah.
Like the way we reduce our risk is that the sector takes off, right? Like the riskiest deals I have in my portfolio right now are the solar thermoelectric projects, because that whole area is dead. But I have a whole bunch of projects that I'm going to like maintain for 20 years, right? Tonopah, Ivanpah, like all those projects.
Right.
Like I still have them in my thing, but nobody wants to maintain them. Nobody wants to own them, like because nobody wants to build new ones, right? And so like I just think that like this is like a profound thing that I feel like everybody wants me to talk about innovation.
Right.
And I like don't want to ever talk about innovation. I want to talk about deployment at infrastructure scale, right? And it's like a weird thing.
Is that because people are, I mean, now you've got me, I was ready to wrap up, and now you got me totally involved. Like, is that because people are kind of looking too far forward, or is it because the hard work of going from I would say order 1 or order 10 to order 100 is just too daunting for them mentally or emotionally? Why do you think that is?
It's like, it's this grass is always greener thing, right? Like, no one knows anything about fusion. So let's like put all of our eggs in that basket and say, fusion's awesome. It's going to get solved next week. It's amazing. Microsoft signed this contract, whatever it is, like, this is great.
Right.
Like what's hard is, we have solar panels and wind turbines and electric vehicles right in front of us. What we need is to, 20x our critical minerals, right? Like that seems complicated. I've got this mine with this tribe, with this thing, with that thing, whatever else. Like, and so like, let's just skip over that and let's go to fusion. Or let's go to this thing and let's go to that thing. And I was like, no, like, I mean, like even fusion will have those problems in 20 years, right?
Right.
Like whatever the problems are that fusion will have, like they'll have the same problems. Like let's get on with fixing, the things that like are holding back the technologies we have today that need to get to gigaton scale.
Right.
Right? And all the things that we need to do. Like it's one of those things where we really do have the smartest people in the world who live here and work here and innovate here. And it's great, right? And so we actually know how to do all this stuff. But we just have to go out and execute. And that means making tough decisions around like all the different aspects of what we need to do, right? I'll give you one last example. There was a story recently around all the dust that's created by, putting solar in the Mojave Desert, right? And maybe we're being too harsh with, solar in the Mojave Desert. I mean, I feel like everything comes with pluses and minuses. Like the minuses there are much more like, like smaller than, other options that we have to produce clean power. But if you wanted to put solar on rooftops, then put them on 300 gigawatts worth of rooftops, right? We could do that too, but it comes with a whole different set of issues, right? Electric utilities don't like distributed generation. We have to like upgrade distribution circuits, like all these other things. Like I just feel like in general, we love to talk about innovation because everyone loves innovation. But we don't like to talk about deployment because everyone has a reason to be a NIMBY. Right? Like everyone, there's a reason why they're like, I love affordable housing, not next to my house. Right? I love like critical minerals, not in my community. Right?
Yeah. Love offshore wind, but not here.
Right. Not in my I zone or whatever it is. Right? And so like, it's just like, but we need to start talking about how we do the hard things and not just like, the innovation, popular science, what's new page or whatever.
I mean, and this is for our next conversation, but do we learn enough on projects 1 through 6 to meaningfully inform our thinking for how we get to 100?
Oh, 100%.
You think so?
Yeah, of course we do. I mean, in general, it's not that we don't learn the lessons. It's more that like now we have a decision-making point. Do you go left or right? Do you like, hit the accelerator or do you hit the brake? Like, do you go under the tunnel or like over? Like, I mean, those are real decisions people have to make. And a lot of folks say, well, let's see how it plays out. Right? Well, let's see how it plays out. Doesn't reach gigaton scale. What reaches gigaton scale is giving the private sector clarity, saying, this is how we're going to do this.
Right.
This is what we're going to do. And let's go out and execute it now.
Great. Well, Jigar, thank you so much for your work and for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you around.
Thanks for having me.